The following episode was originally recorded for a private podcast as part of the Equipped for Life course. It has been edited for public release, but may reference training material from the Equipped for Life course.
So we're going to cover some listener mail today, and the first thing we want to cover relates to the viral series of tweets from a sci-fi author named Patrick Tomlinson about a burning fertility clinic.
I'm sure no one listening to this podcast is aware of what happened here.
Okay, this is seriously a weird thing. So this is something that we all experience from time to time because we're kind of the pro-life guy in our circle of friends.
Right.
Every once in a while, something happens where something happens in the news that relates to abortion or bioethics in some way, and then a couple of my friends will message me about that. Mm-hmm. In this case, it's like 15 people.
Yep.
Like people that never reach out to me, people that I haven't heard from in like 5 to 10 years, reached out to me out of nowhere on Facebook. Hey, you're like a pro-life guy. What do you do with this? This thing got everyone's attention, insanely viral. And so I wrote a blog post responding to it. My post was focused on practical things to keep in mind when you're responding to it, trying to factor in the other person's psychology. They're expecting you to try to wriggle out of it. So to be really, really clear, really intentional about how you respond, and also what kinds of disanalogous things to focus on, because there's a lot. and also linked to a piece from Robert George, which is a more academic response that goes into other issues with the analogy. So that's better for the academic side. So you should read the piece, but if you haven't read the piece, the 4 tips are, first, negotiate for time when someone asks you a complicated question. It is okay if they ask you a crazy complicated question that only takes 5 seconds to ask, but takes more time than that to answer, to say, okay, that's a fair question. Can you give me a couple minutes?
Right.
That's totally fair, and you should absolutely do that when it comes to a case like this. Number 2, respond directly to the question before you jump into your explanation. And this is especially important with this. This one varies a little bit depending on different kinds of circumstances, but it's something that I do generally try to do. When someone asks me they're trying to pin me down, hard question, I want to answer directly before I go into another explanation, because I don't want them to feel like I'm just trying to evade the question.
Right.
Like if I just respond like, oh, well, I'll get back to that in a minute, and then I start talking about something else, they're going to feel like I'm changing the subject. I'm really not. I'm trying to get to it, but they don't necessarily know that. And so I think they listen better if I respond directly. So in this case, in the case as you presented it, I'd save the newborn. Can I explain why? And then go into some explanation. So tip 3, tread incredibly carefully if you want to change their thought experiment. So in this case, I think one helpful thing to try to do, if possible, is make their thought experiment better.
Yeah.
The way pro-choice people usually present this thought experiment is they say, well, what would you do if blah, blah, blah? And that's the wrong question. Because what would I do? Who the heck knows? A better question, and a question that I think is actually more challenging for the pro-life person to respond to, is what do you think you ought to do? If I just want to answer what would I do, I can dodge the meat of their attack. And that's not in their best interest, and it's not in my best interest. So I will try to negotiate with them, like, is it okay if I change this to what I think is a better question? I think it's better. I think that's going to answer what you're actually looking for. But if you're going to do that, you got to tread really carefully, because people don't like having their thought experiments changed around when you're just trying to get out of a problem.
I started making this distinction more often, like in Q&A sessions in the last year, because I watched this Q&A video of William Lane Craig doing a Q&A after thing. Because sometimes I'll just watch his Q&A stuff, because it's like I've seen a lot of the speeches or whatever, so I just want to see, like, because those are kind of always different. And I remember there's like this video, like someone kind of challenging him with this "what would you do" kind of a question, and just in that kind of William Lane Craig style, he's just like, well, that's just a bad question. You know, like that's a psychological question. That's not a question about morality or anything. What you ought to be asking is, this whole, and he goes into this whole thing, or it's like, it really stuck with me. I was like, I need to start making that point more often, because people kind of just naturally are ordered towards asking, what would you do? Because it kind of feels good. It's just like, okay, wrong question. But there's a better question you could be asking. If you can do that in a not too snarky way, like you can't be.
Most people don't have the William Lane Craig charm to pull that off.
Right. Like, certainly you can't, like, that's the line, and you can't go past that line. Like William Lane Craig, after 3 or 4 doctorates, he can say, that's just the wrong question.
Right.
For the rest of us, we've got to do a more Tim Brahm style.
If you have 1 doctorate or less, you can't do the William Lane Craig thing. Or
that's
fewer.
the rule.
So dialogue tip 4 is, when responding to the fertility clinic, start by focusing your response on the easiest things for the pro-choice person to understand. And those are the painful death of the infant and the certainty of the infant's survival if you choose to save him. There's other things. I think those are not actually at a philosophical level the most important things, and I think Robert George addresses the more important things better. But that's not what I do on campus. Like if it comes up in a conversation with a pro-choice person, I want to start by them understanding I'm not just wriggling out of this. Right. I'm not making up crap. And so I'm responding with the things that are going to be the easiest for them to understand. And I walk through some kind of thought experiments for how to show that those things are relevant. That was that post.
I'm really glad that we released it because you're getting all of your friends asking about it. Meanwhile, I'm getting all these emails to info@equalrightsinstitute.com. Like, what do we do with this? Like, we had so many questions. I don't know if there's a single topic we've been asked by more people to talk about.
I don't think so.
Maybe at some point, maybe the Center for Medical Progress videos or something like that. But like,
not even that for me.
I mean, it's hard for me to think of another case where the same question was asked that many times in that short period of time. And I'm always looking for those things, as I've said before, like people who train people in like blogging and podcasting is like always be looking for, if you're asked the same question, at least 3 times, that's probably the kind of thing that a bunch of your audience will be wanting to know about. That's the kind of thing you ought to do a blog post or a podcast or whatever. And here, I think I got 15 or 20 emails. You got 15 different ones from people. Rachel was hearing this from people all around her. You're in
Came
support
up on campus
meetings
at Davidson.
and people are like, all right, I'll support you. I'll give you money. What do you do about the IVF thing? Like, you're having that experience.
Oh yeah.
I'm really glad we released. So I'll link to both of those posts, your piece and the Robert George piece, which is fantastic. A lot of people have asked, what's your favorite thing on this? I'm like, well, besides the practical tips thing that Tim did, our favorite piece so far, and because everybody did a piece. Ben Shapiro did a thing on this. All the kind of conservative people with a lot of mics.
It went viral enough that
they responded to it.
Yeah.
But nobody did it better than Robert George as far as like really tackling the philosophy. So we'll link to both those pieces.
And as far as I know, no one attempted the kind of project that I did.
Yeah.
Like people were all responding with, here's what's wrong with the argument.
Right.
No one else was addressing what's going on psychologically here.
Yeah.
How do you do this in a persuasive way and focus on the right things?
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody else cover that.
I think it's really important.
One of the things one of my friends shared, so when they were reaching out to me asking how to respond to this, like Twitter viral feed, they also sent this funny link to another Twitter feed that didn't go as viral, but definitely got a lot of buzz. This guy's name's Ben Howie. He's like verified on Twitter, which means that he is, semi-famous, has a lot of followers. I think he has like 68,000. And so I kind of want to read his little snarky joke he made about this.
Okay.
So he does a series of tweets which are in the same format as the original series. And so I'm just going to read kind of the thread. He says, "Whenever Star Wars comes up, I have a question I've been asking 10 years now of the Star Trek is better crowd. It's a simple scenario with 2 outcomes. No one ever wants to pick one because the correct answer destroys their argument. And there is a correct answer."
This is so good.
I know. Here it is. You're at Comic-Con. The fire alarm goes off. You run for the exit. As you run down this hallway, you hear William Shatner yelling at hotel staff. You enter the room. They're in one corner of the room. In the other corner, you spot Harrison Ford piercing his other ear with a gaudy diamond stud.
Wow.
The smoke is rising. You start to choke. You know you can shame one or the other, but not both before you die of smoke inhalation, showing favoritism to neither franchise. Do you A, film Shatner and yell, "Phasers on kill"? I can't get through this without laughing. Okay. When the hotel staff calls him a washed-up has-been?
Wow.
Or B, show Ford a picture of himself and call him Han Galo, there is no C. C means no one gets pwned on either message boards later. In a decade of arguing with Star Wars people about the definition of fandom, I've never gotten a straight A-B answer to this question, and I never will.
Wow.
And then, people in the comments are, making fun of it as they go, "Your premise is a fallacy," and then he just keeps replying, "There is no C." There is no C. And, all these people are, liking his, replies.
So
It's a wonderful post.
Okay, we need to get way better at doing this because, frankly, that's not that hard to do what he did.
No,
to,
it's
take,
not.
the format of the thing and just switch, the most important nouns with a different thing. Anybody with a shred of humor can do that, and we should have done that. It's like I'm frustrated now. Like I'm so mad that he had that idea.
It's like the mark of good comedy when you're like, I should have thought of that.
Right. It's really good. So we had meant to do listener mail last episode, and then the discouragement and outrage thing went so long they were like, we'll move listener mail to the next episode. I ended up in kind of an interesting email thread with someone who takes our course named Christine. She heads up a group called Pro-Life Humanists. And like this is like a little bit related to the IVF thing, but it only kind of tangentially. Like it was causing kind of some frustration for her. This whole thing was a frustrating experience for her and me. Like I felt a lot of the same things as she was feeling, although I think she put it really well. And that caused her to ask some questions, and she was interested in my take on it. So I want to share what her questions were and kind of let the rest of you answer it. I have what I said to her too, but one of the things that was frustrating for her was the fact that you had millions of pro-choice people reading this series of tweets versus the hundreds who are reading the thoughtful responses from pro-lifers like us. So this is what she said. I'm extremely frustrated right now as I watch the fertility clinic argument going widely viral. George Takei just shared it with millions of his followers, and the comments and memes that followed his posts are just awful, as in no hope for humanity awful. The problem is that the pro-life position isn't as easy to unravel or as emotionally accessible as a lot of these pro-choice thought experiments. We're dealing with a society that for the most part has not been trained in philosophy or in critical thinking, and are largely embracing these quote-unquote arguments as slam dunks against the pro-life position because they're quick and seem to make intuitive sense, especially for those who are emotionally biased toward choice. How can we possibly overcome that? I've seen some great articles that break apart this argument and others like it, but the majority of people are either not reading them or are dismissing their content because their faulty thinking won't let them get beyond, quote, 5-year-old Trump's embryos aren't equal equals abortion is okay, end quote. That doesn't require mental effort. It's wrong, but how can we ask a society of non-thinkers to rethink and break down why it's wrong? Can pro-lifers really hope to compete in a meme and slogan generation? I feel sometimes like we are losing the public battle in the fast-paced internet world, not because our arguments are bad, but because our arguments require a capacity of thought that the majority of people are no longer equipped for. I'm sure you've seen runaway comment threads that have left you feeling just as defeated. It's truly like that quote about how a lie can travel all around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. It feels like so much mental effort goes into the articles / podcasts / videos we do, but without the reach or the meme power, it seems we can't even begin to undo all the bad thinking out there. We can't win the cause if most people can't even hear us. So I want to stop there. So he has some more things, as he said,
sure.
But kind of let's camp on this idea of you've got the millions reading this, these things get excited about it because they're easy. It's intellectually lazy. They might not know they're being intellectually lazy, but it feels like this awesome, power punch, thing, these slam dunk arguments. Whereas when pro-lifers like us and others respond with, some nuanced thought experiments and things, like it's a lot harder for those to get traction in today's world. I'm interested in your thoughts, and then I'll offer what I gave to Christine.
We definitely sympathize with your frustration. I think that
Sorry, Christine.
Yeah. Sorry.
You're kind of right.
Like every intellectual pro-lifer, I think, feels this amplified online. And we are living in this really fast-paced, who can be the most loud, obnoxious voice. And that person who's grabbing the microphone and has the followers already is oftentimes just smothering all of the well thought out pieces. I think it's definitely a problem. And I sympathize a lot with this question.
Yeah. I think it's almost an inevitable problem. Like I'm thinking in terms of like entropy. Like entropy is like disorder always naturally follows from order and doesn't go the other way around. And this is an example of it's a lot easier to tear something down than to build something up.
Yeah.
It's a lot and that's always the case. This is why negative campaign ads are so successful. It's really hard to be a successful public servant who does everything right for his whole career.
There's
or her
a whole
whole career.
Black Mirror episode about this.
No comment, not getting into Black Mirror. Okay. It's really hard to do that. And like one mistake is going to follow you. Yeah. And if you make one mistake, either in your personal life or in your professional life, or you change your mind about the thing that you aren't supposed to, and then the winds of opinion change, and then you're running for president 20 years later, well, man, you're going to get pounded with this thing. Like it's really, really hard to just do a thing well when you're trying to create. And it's really easy to tear things down. Like all the warriors on Twitter can tear down Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump for all the bad things they've done. It's hard to do good things. It's hard to create companies. This is one of the reasons why it's wrong to say that either of them are just stupid. Like, they're not stupid. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And so I think that's like the foremost thing in my mind when I think about Christine's question is we're fighting against entropy. And so to some extent, we are inevitably swimming upstream.
Yeah, it makes me think of something else that you said once that's related was like, I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to, you're just going to have to trust. I'm not trying to virtue signal or pat ourselves on the back. But like, we have had this conversation in the office a lot because every once in a while something comes up where some kind of lame thing or faulty thinking kind of thing goes viral and is huge and gets all this influence, and we'll try to put out a thing that's kind of nuanced and getting people to be more kind of intellectually virtuous about it and more charitable, but also take down the thing. And it doesn't do that well, usually. And one time you said something, you said, we're working against vice here. Like, this is the problem. Like, some people will always prefer sharing gotcha pieces, like the ones that, like, for example, a lot of times that Matt Walsh will write. Matt Walsh is an amazing writer and he's really funny, but there's just a huge difference between Matt Walsh's tone and our tone. And that's not changing. I mean, unless Matt Walsh changes. Like, our tones, we're not going to become more like Matt Walsh. Yeah. And so there is just a different, like, for a lot of people, it is just so much more fun and funny to, and frankly, comfortable. It's comfortable to think that everyone who disagrees with you is just an idiot. Like, that's the reason they disagree, is they're just dumb. They're dumber than you. And that's why they're a Democrat, or that's why they're a Republican, whatever. Like, it's super comfortable to live in that world where everything is that dualistic. And what we're sometimes trying to do is try to, like, okay, here's what the smartest version of that opposing argument could be, and here's some ways to kind of think about that. And it's more interesting for us. I think it's frankly more helpful for people. It's more healthy, but it's way less fun than the gotcha, look how dumb they are, ha 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 stuff that's out there that frankly tends to get 10,000 times more shares than our stuff does.
That's frustrating. We also have, in a lot of the cases, these viral things, we're up against celebrities. We're up against actors and writers and musicians and things like that who are coming into it with a big platform. Like, if Taylor Swift decided to post a big pro-choice thing, like 100 million people would read it before I got up in the morning. I mean, like, because she's very successful and very well liked. And so I think that's some of what we're up against. But I think you're right. We're kind of fighting against human nature here. I've got like this kind of picture in my head that I want to see if I can externally process, which is something like there's a certain kind of person in like the pro-choice, pro-life debate, kind of more on the fence, like not strongly in one camp or the other. Mm-hmm. And they're a person that the Patrick Tomlinson tweets is more likely to be affected by. Mm-hmm. Like, Patrick Tomlinson, I don't think changed any serious pro-lifers' minds. Could be. Like, it's an interesting enough argument. It's been around for a long time, but it is a really kind of a weird argument. That's why we got so many questions about it. It's
interesting that so many pro-lifers were asking not just what we could do with it, but like, is there a way to respond to this? Yeah. Like, that's kind of concerning to me.
Yeah. So I think to some extent, this is just a really unusually awkward problem, right? Where there's like 17 reasons why it doesn't mean that the pro-choice position is true, but it's not super intuitive if you haven't thought about it before. Yeah. It's kind of like the violinist in that way. Where it's like, man, it just kind of creates an awkward problem. So to some extent, we're up against a legitimately clever argument. Right. And so, like, just kind of grant that. But also, I don't think it changed most people who have, like, roots in deep. And I think what we're trying to do by having people think through the other position well and thinking through the arguments carefully is we're trying to change people's minds in a way where the roots are going to get in deep. And we don't want to trick them into being pro-life with some lame argument and then have them become pro-choice again. We're trying to make a serious worldview shift with the kind of arguments that we're making and the kind of approach that we're making, where we're trying to be charitable to both sides and help people to feel emotionally safe, is, I think, more likely to cause roots to go in deep. But it's harder to do that in a way that most people are going to accept, because the making the roots go in deep side is less appealing. And so people that are in the area where the roots aren't in as deep and they're able to be shifted by the one thing, they can also be shifted by something else. And so in that sense, it's kind of okay, well, both sides are even. But then we've got this other problem where it's like it's easier to be pro-choice, given like societal pressures and that kind of thing. And like, everyone wants to be feminist, and while most feminists say you have to be pro-choice to be feminist, so I guess I'm going to be pro-choice. And so that means if you kind of sway in this kind of ping-ponging fashion with, you don't have that deep roots, but you sway to the pro-choice side from something like the Tomlinson series of tweets, it's easier to stay there because once you're there, you kind of want to just, you want to be there. Yeah. I think that's a lot of what's in my mind when you mentioned how we're up against vice. I think it's that kind of vice that just causes us to be inevitably on the defense. And until the winds of opinion change and people at the top realize, oh, gee, I guess we can't hide behind it's not even alive anymore, which there's still idiot politicians and people in the media that will say those kinds of things. Eventually, maybe that'll just become so obviously unacceptable that they'll stop doing that. And maybe that'll make a difference and that'll make it a little bit less acceptable. And then something else will happen. It'll make it a little less acceptable. And people who have deep roots in the pro-life position because they understand the argument well, will make that kind of lasting change happen. But it's really hard to make a viral tweet storm happen. I mean, in general, it's hard to make any viral tweet storm happen that isn't snarky and obnoxious.
Right.
That's just what the medium is.
Right. I want to try to offer some hope.
Please do.
Things could get better. But it would take a lot of intentionality. So I had lunch yesterday with one of my new Mormon friends, and he was asking a lot about my work. And yeah, he's pro-life, but he's fairly pessimistic about the long-term future of like our country when it comes to issues like abortion. Whereas I've got more optimism than I had 5 years ago, basically because I think Students for Life students are so great. And I think a lot of them, or some, not a lot, but some of them are going to take over the pro-life movement in 20 years. And we're going to have a more effective movement because I just see there's a lot of intelligence, a lot of thinking carefully about what has worked in the past, what has not worked in the past, and kind of and thinking more almost like business leaders. I'm talking to more people who are like, how do we measure our results and how do we, figure out what's working. It's like all that stuff. Like I want every single pro-life organization doing those things. So it
is good to try to measure
hope.
Results.
It is good to measure results. And so I've got some hope. Does that mean that I'm going to declare and promise you that abortion is going to end in 40 years? No, I don't know. But I've got more hope than I did before I worked with so many Students for Life students, basically. But he's pretty pessimistic. And we started talking about the open-mindedness, closed-mindedness thing and the confirmation bias and people in echo chambers thing. And he said, how do you talk to someone who's closed-minded? What do you do with that person? You're not going to get them to be pro-life, right? And I said, you lead by example. You show them what it looks like to be open-mindedness. You speak open-mindedness and say things like, I might be wrong, but, it seems to me, you just say those things that open-minded people tend to say a lot and show them what it looks like to be open-minded and try to lead by example. And maybe you don't get them pro-life that day, but maybe you get them closer to being open that they're wrong about things. And that's huge. And so there's kind of I think my hope is that people could lead by example here and work together to cause a big thing to happen. So CGP Grey, we've talked about CGP Grey a lot because he's one of our favorite YouTubers. He's awesome. Now his channel is huge. At least at one time he was the most donated to person on Patreon. His fans love him. Mm-hmm. And his stuff goes viral basically every time. It's just a question of how viral, basically. But in the beginning, it wasn't this huge channel. It wasn't what he was doing full time. It was just every once in a while. And he's and he does what you're not supposed to do on YouTube. He posts once every 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. But it's so good.
But it's so good. And a lot of times the topics are very kind of shareable. The ratio of views to sharers on his channel is very, very high. A lot of the people that watch those videos also then share them on Facebook. And that was true early on. And that's one of the reasons that his following grew so much was he had a particularly excited or enthusiastic fan base that said, this is really quality content. Other people should be watching this. I'm going to do the thing. It's not like I'm sharing 8 YouTube videos a day on Facebook, but this is really good. I'm going to share this one. And then other people saw it and was like, this is awesome, and subscribed. And now his videos get, 10, 20, 30 million views when he releases them. And there's a thing like that can happen. You see, sometimes, Twitter helped make a little revolution happen in, I forget what country, but it was recently, it was a big deal. Was there was this it enabled people to be able to organize and coordinate. And all this to say, yes, we're working against vice, But like the people who get our course tend to not be the vice people. Like whenever I talk to people who've gotten our course and like they meet me at an event and we're talking, like they tend to like be our people or feel like our people. And I don't know, if the chicken or the egg came first, but either way, by the time I'm talking to them, like this is like great. Like we're having a great conversation. Let's try to be the change we want to see in the world. Like, and here's the thing. So this is going to sound really self-serving. I don't think ERI is the only stuff that you ought to be sharing on Facebook. I like Secular Pro-Life. Their blog posts a lot of times are great. They'll do the kind of statistical analysis on stuff that we're not doing and not really interested in doing anytime soon. Like it's amazing some of the stuff that they'll put out. But if you're looking for posts that are going to help pro-life people get to this place, it's like if you're feeling like, okay, we're done with stupid straw man memes and articles, and we're only going to share articles that help people to think better and be more virtuous, and that my pro-choice friends can easily read and not get like completely annoyed by, and now I can't talk to that person. Share our stuff. Your IVF thing got 21 Facebook shares. Okay, that's
21.
21. That's not enough. I've got all the other analytics. I'm not even going to say what they are. It's not enough for us to have the kind of impact that we want to have. But
that's like about as many people as messaged me.
Like it did okay. It wasn't the worst like read article that we've ever done, but it's also
that's sad.
It's not. We've had other pieces do a lot better. Even recently, your thing on the strawman meme, like don't
Sure.
do the strawman meme. That for us, that went viral. That was one of the most read pieces that has ever been on our blog. Partly thanks to Dank Pro-Life Memes, who posted it and was like, "This is awesome," and then most of their audience like seemed to hate it. At least most of the commenters hated it, but they're the ones who like strawman memes. So whatever. We're
way to go, Elijah.
That flow, but we love Elijah, who's leading Dank Pro-Life Memes. He's great. If everyone was like, "Hey, if we want to see the pro-life movement be less vice and more virtue," then be out there looking, not just at our stuff, but looking for the things. How can you help influence people to think more like that? And frankly, our stuff ought to be getting shared more than 21 times if we want to see that happen. And so I would love to see this little kind of cultural revolution happen in the pro-life movement, but we need the help. Yeah. We're doing kind of the best we can, and we can only help the people who actually read our stuff.
You have to spread the word. You've got to share the posts. Tell your friends about the course. Obviously, you're taking the course because you're hearing this podcast. Talk to your other pro-lifers. It's not just designed for groups. It's great for groups. Individuals take it too. Tell your friends who are interested in the pro-life movement, interested in trying to learn to do dialogue better about this resource. It's a really good resource. If we want to see things get better, you got to share it.
I also want to give another comment that might bring some hope. The way I kind of look at it with our meme culture, people are consuming this like fast food all of the time.
That's a really
and
good
sometimes sometimes it feels really discouraging because you're looking around, you're like, okay, everyone's getting really fat and unhealthy because they're eating McDonald's all the time.
Meme McDonald's.
Awful. And like it can be really discouraging, but you would be surprised that when you offer those people a like wonderfully nutritious homemade meal, they are starving for it. They want it, and if they taste it, they just like cannot get enough.
Yeah.
I think in our human nature there is that like addiction that can happen for like the cheap, quick, snarky thing.
Yeah. And
that's the vice that's spreading it. But there's also something that's greater about our nature, that we want more. We have that curiosity, we have that craving for something more, and we want to give it to them.
Yeah. Think about like how big podcasts are.
Yeah.
Like how many downloads does Joe Rogan get on his 3-hour podcast like every time? It's like
at this point he's over 100 million downloads a month.
That is ridiculous. It's a 3-hour podcast.
That makes him maybe the most powerful interviewer in the history of the world, because that means he's got over 1 billion a year.
Yeah. Phenomenal stuff. And he's really good at it, and he's entertaining. He also came in with celebrity that gives him kind of a leg up. And he's really, really good at what he does. Yeah. The fact that many people want to listen to thoughtful conversation between Joe Rogan and whoever his guest is, I think Rachel's right. There is a craving. People do want more.
Yeah, and you saw this a little bit with the reaction to that Richard Dawkins piece that I wrote back, which is why I even wrote a follow-up. Like, I felt a little bit bad writing the follow-up because it sounds really self-congratulatory. But the point was, we did something different. And then you've got, I love the comments under the original Dawkins piece, because it's a bunch of pro-choice philosopher atheist people mad that we had done the best job talking about this on either side, and just I can't believe it was white Christian men, pro-life men, right? But they had to be a little bit frustrated and respectful at the same time. Hey, kind of, hat tip to you for doing that. I think some people do want that, and when they see it, they get really excited. I just want there to be a lot more people that are actually excited when they see it, as opposed to the people, that's sometimes when Life News has run our stuff, and then all the comments are oh, these people are, they're a bunch of pansies, and we ought to be open-minded, and all these different things that happen. It's like those, that's not our people. It's they don't get excited. The other piece of hope is, to be fair, yes, the meme, the tweets went viral. George Takei has a huge following. He posts hilarious things on Facebook sometimes, and so he's got a massive following. I get that, but we also don't know how many people read Ben Shapiro's response and some of these other responses from people who do have a lot more influence than us right now. It could be that those people have a big enough following that as many people read some kind of pro-life response as retweeted the tweets. I don't know, because I don't have those guys' web analytics, but I'm sure it's pretty big. It's not only hundreds saw a pro-life response. Easily tens of thousands, or maybe even at least hundreds of thousands, saw some kind of pro-life response. Was it the best pro-life response? Probably not. I'm guessing Robert George doesn't get that many reads compared to a Ben Shapiro. But it wasn't literally millions to hundreds. So that's something. There was another kind of subtopic that happened in my email exchange with Christine, and this is a very short quote on this, but it's kind of this idea of she was frustrated that a lot of pro-life groups are not presenting sound arguments. Christine said, "There's only a small handful of pro-life groups that I feel are presenting sound arguments rather than perpetuating these stereotypes that shut down dialogue." And so my response to this was this can definitely get better. Again, I've got hope, because I know who the future pro-life leaders are. And a lot of them are not perpetuating bad stereotypes. And there are some other pro-life groups that are, I see some good stuff come from other pro-life groups. I certainly don't think we're the only shining light in the pro-life movement or something. There's some really good stuff out there. Does it get the most views? Not usually, but I think it can get better. My vision is a pro-life movement in 20 years where at least half the organizations or more are not doing dumb straw men, versions of responding to dumb straw men pro-choice arguments, and are being really careful in the way that they're presenting arguments. I think we can get there. That is an attainable goal. That gives me some hope. But then there's this other thing, and I have heard this question from a lot of people, specifically responding to the way that ERI is trying to make a difference in the movement. So I think it's a very fair question, and one for us to talk about a little bit. Christine said, "And even if you train more, one conversation at a time seems like a very long and slow process. Especially since most people out there aren't bent toward philosophical discussions to begin with. The bulk of the general public's digging into this issue will be what they glean from friends, TV, and catchy memes. Beyond the philosophy students and the debate enthusiasts, how will we reach the majority?" What are some thoughts that you guys have on that?
So there's something I often tell kind of the newer pro-life people who want to get really involved in the movement. They want to see some change in their local area, and that is that you can't sail a ship if you're not the captain. You're not the captain of the ship. You can't say what direction you need to go in.
Yeah.
And if you have this vision where you're all right, we need to make more headway. We're not doing this just one conversation at a time. We need this organization to be making headway here and this organization to be making headway here. You have to build up those relationships and those connections. And so you don't have to necessarily be president of, the local Right to Life chapter, or you don't have to be actually on the board of the Pregnancy Resource Center. But if you have connections with those people who are kind of leading the pro-life stuff in your area, and you can plant seeds in their mind and kind of almost convert them to your vision, you all of a sudden become a person of influence where you're friends with all the captains. So you can be captain of your ship, and you're building these relationships. And over a period of time, you're making monumental steps, and it's like this exponential spreading. And then when you have that conversation with that pro-choice student and they change their mind, they become pro-life. I want you to think about people who like convert and make major life changes. They are not the apathetic people you encounter. Those are the people that are the most on fire. Like I compare this when I talk to my like Catholic friends. I'm like, think about like Catholic converts, you know, who like used to be atheists. And it's kind of a known thing in the Catholic community that people who converted to Catholicism are like the hardcore people. They're not like the people like at church who like are like texting in the pew, you know, like they're like the people who are like really on fire. And I see that too with people who used to be pro-choice and are now pro-life. These are the people who like are actively doing all the pro-life things.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more than just changing that person's mind or having a good conversation. There's like an explosion that happens.
There's also like something that I've seen in pro-life organizations is how much influence you can have even if you're not leading it. And so like I'd love to see people, like I know a lot of times I'm talking about like the future leaders of the movement. Like I would love to see a lot of the Students for Life students go and just work at a pro-life organization so they can have a lot of influence there, because depending on the leader, you can have a ton of influence if you're good at your job. I might be leading ERI. That doesn't, like, the amount of influence that Tim has over the things that we say and do is huge. Like, it's not just going to be the leader. When I was working at Right to Life Central California, I wasn't the leader of the thing, but a lot of what we did for the, 6 years that I was there was because, like I said, I think we should do a podcast. We should do 40 Days for Life. We should do Justice for All. We should do Sidewalk counseling training. Those are like all things that I just said, we should do these things. Let's figure out how to do it. And then we did it. And the leader was fundraising and making it possible for us to do all these things. So it kind of just gave our staff a lot of leadership and said, yeah, go do those hard things, figure it out, go do it. And that was awesome. So you don't even have to like, oh man, I'm going to be 40 before I can become a CEO of a pro-life group. Just go become an education director somewhere or go be one of the speakers. I've been around PRCs.
We'll just volunteer.
Where if you're just like, if you can go and be like the youth speaker for a PRC, they don't tend to micromanage what you talk about, like what all your entire speech has to be. You got to put together a talk and be like, is this cool? And they'll say, yeah, go speak to all the Catholic churches and confirmation classes in our area and all the public schools. We've got an in. We just need young, kind of cool, funny pro-life speakers. Go do that thing. You can then just like, what are the pro-life arguments that you're teaching? Like that suddenly becomes something like where you can have so much influence, just like working, but you've got to have skin in the game. Sometimes as a volunteer, you can have a lot of influence, but a lot of times it's the staff. If you're there part-time or full-time, you can completely change or add to the things that an organization is doing and really, really improve it for the good.
The other thing that I'd say in response to that question is I think she's selling people short or something. It is not just debate enthusiasts who want to talk about abortion. If that was the case, we wouldn't talk to very many people when we do outreach. We talk to a lot of people when we do outreach.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that everyone is making some kind of a comment or has some kind of an opinion about abortion. Even the people who say, I don't know, I don't have an opinion, they've got an opinion that they shouldn't have an opinion. And so I just don't buy their whole approach. I think basically everyone has an opinion about abortion if they know anything about it. By the time you're in college, you know something about abortion. And so we put up a table that says, should abortion remain legal? And sometimes random people, quiet people who are not going to be the person who's going to speak up in class or join the debate team, come up and talk to us. You have friends all over the spectrum of people that are interested in debate or apologetics or politics or anything like that. You have people that are very interested and they're going to be quick to jump in and spar with you. And you've got other friends who aren't going to be quick to, but they've got an opinion and they might share that opinion or might not share that opinion. And so I think it's the wrong perspective to have. It's not just debate enthusiasts. You have a lot of influence in your circle, in your sphere of influence, and that's not just the random people that love to argue. And
your friends and strangers will surprise you. Like one of my tongue-in-cheek jokes at outreach is whenever a student comes up to the table and they ask me, how long is this going to take? And I always say, a couple minutes. They're the ones who stay there for 2 hours talking. And it's the same thing with your friends. You bring it up, they're like, oh, I don't want to get into that. It's a lot. And then you kind of like draw them in and you plant a seed, and then they're the ones that you end up talking about abortion like 20 times.
Yeah. One other thing on that question, there is something to the fact that it is a long process. Yep. Like if you've got to invest 3 hours in conversation into changing a mind, well, that's 3 man-hours for changing just one mind. But I think my reaction when people bring up how how long a process this takes is to say it's just realistic. I think we have a better understanding of human nature than people that aren't interested in dialogue. Humans don't change their minds from having pamphlets handed to them.
Yep.
Almost ever.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be an occasional story that someone's going to give you. Those do not demonstrate that it's a good method. The kinds of things, think about the way that you have changed your minds about things. It has to do with conversations or maybe books that you've read about the subject. It has to do with finding a passion, something or other that grabs your attention about a thing. Sometimes that's emotional. Like, it's not just a matter of, this isn't the kind of thing that we can successfully change thousands of minds on with little effort.
Yeah.
So like, what I want to say is like, yes, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. This is a big problem and the roots run really deep. So get used to that. That's what we have to do. There's a lot of work that has to be done. You don't change a cultural belief like this with a really clever pamphlet or a really clever tweet.
There's a movie quote in my mind. I don't know where it's from, but I know what the quote is. It's supposed to be hard. The hard is what makes it
League
great.
of Their Own. Tom
League of Their
Hanks.
Own.
Yeah.
Yes. That's what I hear you saying. The hard is what makes it great.
That's not what I'm saying. I would rather it be easy. If I could do it with Twitter and just end abortion, it would be less great, and I would be fine with that because then babies wouldn't be dying.
Fair enough.
I'm saying, like, realistically speaking, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that the method that we're suggesting takes as much time as it does,
Yeah.
but it's better and it's more effective than everything else.
Yeah.
So get to work.
So the other thing I was going to say was, I think like there's a truth in what Christine is talking about like the meme culture that we are in and how much people are influenced by memes that causes me to basically think, and I haven't talked to you about this yet, but it's kind of like, we should probably be making more memes. Like, it's part of my answer to that.
I think
like,
to some extent.
Dank pro-life memes has completely affected the way that I think about this. I used to make so much fun of memes. I hated memes. In fact, I railed against memes in multiple speeches. There's probably still live speech audio of me somewhere talking about how awful memes are.
I've also pushed you hard on memes as well.
That's fair. So multiple people have caused me to think that there are a lot of really bad memes. But if you look at Dank pro-life memes, a lot of the stuff that they're sharing is really good and getting a whole bunch of shares. So I said, like, our articles aren't. And there's a sort of influence thing happening. So like I was thinking recently, like maybe we should try to get to the point where we can release a meme with every article that sort of tries to simplify the article. And if you don't want to share the entire thing on your Facebook, here's a picture that sort of distills everything down as best we can into 2 or 3 sentences. And if nothing else, share that. And at least then we're having more influence than we are if we just do the article. Like, that's maybe something that we might try to do.
I think that's a thing worth trying. I don't know how well we can execute that. We might need to talk with Elijah more, people that are better at that kind of thing. But we were just, before we started recording, Rachel had some cool meme ideas that she was sharing with us. Yeah. I think there's something to that. And my view is not we should never ever do memes. And I think some of the fact that people want to have McDonald's, like, all right, if the only thing you're willing to make is like fancy French food or something, we just watch Ratatouille. All you want to do is eat fancy French food, then you're going to have a smaller audience.
Before we end the episode, there's something, a different thing, but it's kind of related to the IVF thing that I just wanted to say, because I realized that there might be a certain like kind of mutated form of this argument that specifically religious pro-life students might get on campus that I just wasn't expecting when it got emailed to me. So I just want to like let you know like what my response was real quick. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing this is easy enough that you both might not have much to add besides what I said, but I hadn't been asked this specifically before. So Christine and I were going back and forth. Remember, Christine is an atheist. She's doing work as a pro-life atheist, and we love working with pro-life atheists and all the different groups. So Christine and I have a good friendship. But she was asking me questions like specifically like really trying to get me like what would you do with the IVF thing or what ought you do? Like, what do you think you ought to do with the IVF thing? And religion became part of the discussion that I wasn't expecting. So anyway, so I'm just going to read this short exchange that we had. Christine said, when you say that, frankly, after a few people, the numbers probably matter more as far as like who you ought to save. Do you mean that you might choose 1,000 embryos over the single comatose infant, more so than if it was 10 embryos? And I said, generally, my answer to questions like this will be that if everything is equal, I'll go with saving the most people, or I ought to go with saving the most people. When extra factors are added, that makes it trickier. So if it's my wife, I have some kind of moral obligation to protect her, and my emotions are much more likely to come into play. But so those could cause me to make a bad moral decision. But if it's my wife versus 100 people, it seems fairly intuitive to me that the right decision is to save the 100. Exactly where is that threshold? I don't know, because I'm not sure how strong my moral obligations to my wife over other people are. So Christine responded. She said, interesting. I was always taught in church that a man is supposed to prioritize his wife as only second to Christ and his children after that. So the strangers would come after them. I know that's a religious position, but for a Christian, wouldn't that also be your moral duty? I'm not sure that 100 comatose infants would be above your wife, even from a secular point of view. Emotional and family ties matter. Don't we have more obligation to our friends and family than we do to strangers? So this was just kind of
a fair question.
That's a fair question. So this was my response, and we'll see if you guys have anything to add. I just said I think it's prima facie true, like on its face, it's true that I have stronger obligations to my wife and kids than I do strangers. But it's pretty obvious that those stronger obligations can be broken by a ridiculously strong obligation. It seems like that becomes pretty obvious if you change it to, I can save 1 million people versus my wife. Like, obviously, while I do have a strong obligation to my wife, that doesn't trump 1 million lives. So it's probably a more nuanced thing than you were taught in church. And that happens a lot. Some Christians have views that are like close to the truth, but like they're said in kind of simplistic ways, and they might just not be equipped to make like more nuanced distinctions. So I was just thinking like it'd be like if you're a Christian student and like someone's like, yeah, but if you're married, you're actually not allowed because the Bible says that, you know, it's God first and then spouse and then kids and then after, like, so you can't pick strangers over your spouse. Like I think that's a straw man of what maybe some Christians say.
Yeah, I'd want to ask them really specifically what Bible verses they're pointing to justify that view. I think something like, but the Bible says, like your picture of like what you think Christianity teaches is maybe something like that. But how are you justifying that actually? So like let's get into like you want to talk about this passage or that passage and try to like explain what I think it means. I think certainly it's true that we have more of an obligation to our family than we do to strangers. I think one of the things that was obvious to us as we were writing the de facto guardian paper is it seems like we've got more of an obligation to people in our immediate vicinity than people across the world. Doesn't mean we have no obligation to people across the world, but it's different. And so, but like where those lines are and like, okay, should you care more about one person in your community or 16 people across the world? Like it's not an obvious enough moral principle in how it operates that makes it easy to draw those lines. And so the obvious case is like, okay, well, the whole country of Nigeria is going to be bombed and I can stop that, or I can stop this one child from going hungry for one meal in my community. Okay, that one's obvious. Where the line is just not clear where the line is.
Right. And we're not saying it doesn't matter. Like these are like important things to be thinking about, but it doesn't make it obvious either.
Exactly.